1, 2, 3, 4. It was intended for the human to support the machine to support the human.
AI means something different to anybody you talk to, which is wild.
This is AI or Die.
Welcome to AI or Die, episode 23. This is our Easter episode. This is our Michael Jordan episode, being episode 23. So it's just Reagan and Nick today. No Brendan. He is very, very busy right now. So we're going to do it with the OGs, Reagan and Nick. So the usual, we'll get into personal stuff, life updates. We'll get into what's in the news. There's a lot of really interesting stuff that's happening out there, especially from a risk and agentic standpoint that we want to talk through. And then later, we're going to have Scott, a friend of the show, and a partner from Andelyn, to join us and talk through a lot of the cool stuff that they're working on as well, too. So to get going, life updates. I'm calling in from the sunroom. So if you guys are watching this podcast on video, you'll notice I have kind of a sepia background to me. You'll also notice there's a little bit of paint on the actual blinds behind me as well, too. That is me trying to paint the ceiling and then getting paint on the blinds as I'm going through it as well, being a bit messy. But
I wouldn't have noticed if you didn't point it out.
It's that little stuff. When you work on your own house, there's little stuff that you notice that nobody else ever notices. I mean, I have that sometimes on like slides that we have or like things in our product too, that all the little details you notice when you're with it for so long.
The worst is the opposite. It's like when you don't notice everybody else.
There's a typo on a keynote presentation that you're giving or something like that the audience calls out. Yeah. So that's key stuff. It's warm here, finally getting into summer. I got some travel coming up. It's springtime. Spring has sprung. I'm stoked about that. Reagan, how are you?
You're out. You're on a big trip.
Yes, I have a big Euro trip coming up. If any listeners are in Paris or Amsterdam or Belgium, I will be there in a little bit. Depends on when you listen to this episode, but looking forward to finally taking some time off. This is a big trip. That'll be a couple weeks. This is the first time I've taken a long trip like that. So really excited about that. Really excited to just do some more European travel. I haven't seen much of Europe, just Spain. So I'm excited to see more aspects of it.
Fun.
Yeah.
That's exciting. Very exciting.
What you got coming up, man? What's new with you?
Yeah, I've got a little bit of time off coming up. Headed to Texas. It's my husband and my anniversary.
Already? Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
I feel like we started this podcast and we were talking about your wedding on one of the episodes a while back too. It's already been a year. That's crazy.
Yeah, it's wild.
Yeah, so can't believe you're going there. That's very exciting. What else you got coming up?
Yeah, I'm headed there for our, anniversary, but also for our baby moon. So we're having a baby in August.
Very exciting. Baby AI or Die. We'll make sure they are a listener. We will play it on their
I was going to say, he might be kind of a genius, just kind of taking in all the AI.
All of this talk. He's going to come out just building software for AI as soon as
Totally.
That's exciting.
He's going to be vibe coding out the womb. It'll be great.
Yeah. You know how they do like Baby Einstein music? Maybe you do a twist on that and you do like
for sure.
One of the keynotes that you give or something like that. That's very exciting. Yeah. So lots coming up. I know we got some events coming up as well too. Folks, we recently did a live webinar. Reagan and Brendan did one. What was that, a week or two ago? So go and check that out as well. What are some of the stuff you talked about on that webinar, Reg?
Yeah, we talked about some of the different patterns that we're supporting with our customers. So we have operating model, which is essentially every enterprise's mechanism of building and deploying AI, in addition to all of the approvals and governance processes and kind of roles and responsibilities and general frameworks that they're implementing. And so we talked about that quite a bit. We talked about use case management and what that looks like inside of an organization. It's not just coming up with ideas and shoving it in Excel, right? It's more of a holistic approach of risk evaluation, value estimation, and feasibility assessments, and being able to route those for approvals and kind of quick route low risk use cases. So we talked about that a bit. We did touch on agents a little bit towards the end of that webinar. And I think just like the holistic sense of how companies are trying to increase throughput. You know, the biggest point of frustration for a lot of the companies we work with is that they can't move fast enough.
Right.
And why can't they? Well, it's never really a technical challenge, truly. It's typically a lack of understanding around risk evaluation, along with, getting through the bureaucracy of it, right? Like just trying to set up some of those processes for the first time and run through them.
It's funny you talk about those different lenses of prioritization, because value, of course, but also the risk, the feasibility from a data preparedness standpoint. With a lot of the teams we work with, it's like they really focus in and nail one of those. Like they really nail, hey, we have a risk eval framework for use cases coming in, or we've taken a very value-based prioritization mechanism for this. But then the other ones kind of fall to the wayside, which are also super critical. So it almost shifts around the bottleneck that they experience. If they don't nail risk eval up front, it'll bottle them back later. If they don't nail value attribution up front, they'll really struggle with adoption and having that business case confirmed on the tail end of adoption as well too. It's a lot to cover for folks, and I think that's maybe why they feel a bit overwhelmed and why we're having to help a lot of these folks out too. But I just think each one, it's interesting just to see how each industry and each company we work with has a different approach to it. For sure. So check out that webinar, guys. That's also out there. With that, I'd like to get into the news. At the top, this week, OpenAI updated their system for evaluating AI risks. So just some cliff notes for our listeners. They basically have a system that they use to evaluate the risks for new models. And this matters because they've had this preparedness framework from like 2023. So it's been a couple of years that it's been out there. We'll link it in the description below. It's interesting because OpenAI will no longer specifically evaluate models on distinguishing a low to medium risk to high risk. They're really just going to focus on the high and the critical levels of risk, which is interesting because a lot of teams we work with, they're thinking about risk of AI use cases and AI solutions being evaluated from a low, medium, high. We're working with a lot of folks to see what's that fast track. Like what's the low risk stuff that we need to call out as a separate path that we don't have to take through the full risk eval and the full, gates that we need to go through if it's a much more high or critical use case or risk use case. OpenAI is taking kind of a different approach where they are really defining what makes for high and critical, and then everything else is essentially not worth kind of that deep evaluation side of things too. A bit of an evolution. I think a lot of teams in the enterprises are still in that low, medium, high framework. OpenAI is kind of leading that of just saying, no, we're going to focus on the high and the critical stuff. And then everything else they've deemed as less important or less critical to do the full, evaluation framework against that. What are your thoughts on that, Reg? I think that's interesting.
Yeah, I think this big shift into the risk of the context on the usage side was the piece that I took away most. I had been saying this and beating this drum for years now, and if you go back and listen to any of our previous podcasts, you'll hear me articulating the same point, which was that risk actually happens at the outcome level. And so when they're talking about high risk models, they're talking about historically size of models, how big are models, how many parameters are models. And to me, that just doesn't make sense as a dimension to evaluate to an extent, right? And I think what they're shifting towards is something that I agree with, which is the context of usage. And to your point, Nick, I think enterprises have a different incentive in the sense that they want to fast track the lowest risk use cases in the beginning. If you think about maybe a more traditional enterprise who's getting into AI, they want to build the muscle in the least risky way as possible. If you're an OpenAI, you're probably dealing with things on a different dimension. And so I think for enterprises, it's almost the opposite. It's like, what is the least risky thing we can do? And everything else we can just consider to be high risk for now and drill into the nuance of what's acceptable. I think most companies are still really, really unsure of where that threshold is. Like if you were to go in and say, what's the criteria of we will never touch this use case? A bank may know because they're used to certain areas that they just don't touch. But other organizations may not have that dialed in. And that creates a lot of complexity and challenges for companies to really make the call. And so they're starting with something that's a little bit more cut and dry, which I think is really interesting.
And it comes back to a lived experience by the company. OpenAI is a way different place than where they were even in 2023. They have so much more volume of users and amount of solutions that they have out there, and they have so many only so many resources, just like an enterprise. So it's coming back to really focusing on the high critical stuff. And I think I agree. As more enterprises roll out AI solutions and get that experience under their belt of what is a true risk that we should really set up, that evaluation for versus not, they gotta kind of live through it and do it themselves and get stuff into production to learn as they go, specific to their company. For sure. That's a good one. Also in the news, we have more, OpenAI news related to, they have this technical playbook now for helping with enterprise AI integration. It's the classics, guys. We talk about this on every single episode, which is making sure to embed AI in core experiences and product experiences specifically. Make sure you have a structured evaluation up front and invest early into make sure you are capturing what those financial benefits are. I mean, we just talked about this from a feasibility standpoint, looking at how do we capture the benefits for this first version of the AI solution, and then how does that compound over time as we could extrapolate out that solution to other valuable areas in the organization too. So pretty base stuff, but it's interesting that they're putting out more and more. They're calling them playbooks, kind of like us, but like that guidance for enterprises to really help with that integration, that adoption, that long tail. People even say like the last mile of AI adoption there, which is interesting.
Yeah, eval is going to be number one, especially with the rise of agentic systems. Eval is top of mind for everyone. All the stories, I think you even included a story for today that was like, an agent not going rogue, but
yeah, Cursors. That was Cursor's customer support agent that they had set up. That went rogue in the past month. Yeah.
So the mistakes, the thresholds of mistakes, acceptable mistakes. I mean, this is nothing new. We are more willing to accept mistakes from humans than we are from machines. We expect machines to be infallible, and that's just not the case. And they're going to make mistakes, and it's how much agency you provide these systems to be able to act after a mistake has been made. And so I don't know. I find the eval frameworks, the eval methodology, the testing frameworks to be probably the most critical for organizations to get correct, and it's still the least developed.
It's funny you say that, and that's so true about our expectations for a machine being perfect versus a human. So Cursor, just back to that, when we say it went rogue, basically what it did is it triggered a wave of cancellations for customers who were chatting with it, right? Canceling their accounts. And to your point around like, if it was a customer service agent, I think there would be the scalability issue wouldn't be as massive because it's one person making these mistakes. So that scale thing is less of a risk, but also because it's a human, we're willing to give each other some slack. And we're willing to say like, okay, you messed up, we can fix it there. But there's this expectation that we kind of see on the adoption side of Gen AI tools getting rolled out too, which is it must be perfect or it's not game time ready. It's almost unfair expectations for how these solutions evolve over time that people really need to wrap their heads around.
Yeah, and there's so many checks and balances that we've been, whether consciously or unconsciously, that we've kind of baked into process at a lot of organizations, especially like even ours, right? We check, double check, I send to you, you look it over, review it, get another set of eyes on it. Like there's these kind of processes that we've put in place to try to catch some of those errors. And, a lot of these agentic evaluation frameworks are baking some of that in, where it can have a quote different perspective on the eval or review of the outputs before, kind of like a checker, if you will, before it moves on in the flow. And we're organizing an AI agent conference in San Francisco in about a month, and that is a majority of the content is really these eval, quality check, testing, simulation testing frameworks for agentic systems, because it is truly going to be the barrier to adoption.
Yeah, and we see that process point, especially around make sure you have a solid understanding and just tactics for listeners. We're helping so many teams just lay out what's the process impact of these AI solutions, and then what's the process for checking and being either human in the loop or some sort of hybrid AI to evaluate that it's still doing the right thing that we trained it for before putting it out into production too. It's this deep process understanding that still needs to happen anytime you're talking about an AI solution getting implemented, that it's base stuff, just like data preparedness. It's base stuff, it's foundational, it's stuff that we all know, but it's important to keep that exercise going and build that skill within teams to be able to do that so you can really scale more and more solutions in the eval process being more federated. So you can scale that in that way too. Looking at other stuff, we talked about Cursor. We also looked at just more and more surveys coming out in 2025, talking about enterprise focus on agentic and that being the keyword for the year. I mean, we call that out in the first episode of the year as well too, but it seems like more of that is accelerating on the agentic side. And there's this term I really liked from one of the articles we were reading just around that term hybrid AI, where it's Gen AI fused with traditional AI techniques like optimization, forecasting, rule-based systems, and that turning into a word like hybrid AI. So we talk about human in the loop, being the human to quality check in the flow of the process, what the AI is outputting before we actually send it off or share it with a potential customer. Hybrid AI is that blend of Gen AI tools plus traditional ML tools working together in that way to help solve the wider solutions instead of one solution being posed to do it all in that way.
Yeah, I think I also call back to a previous episode, mentioned this trend from a research paper about a year and a half ago as well, and talked about how the contextual layer may look at language and leverage generative in that capacity. The agentic frameworks may leverage the ability to reason, and we may leverage other ML systems that have predictive capabilities on more relational type data because they tend to perform better. And we can create kind of predictive capabilities leveraging that and kind of put it into a holistic context for an organization by generating a system instead of thinking about it as a model, which is often what we like to promote in terms of terminology. Is less of focusing on the AI model, which everybody gets so hyper focused on for some reason, and talking more holistically about the system itself, which is more important. I mean, when you talk about a person's brain, I'm not referencing one of your neurons, right?
Yeah.
I'm referencing the holistic system and the outcome and potentially even the interface to that, whether it's through writing or speech or whatever, right? Or a book that is the outcome of thought. And so when you think about AI systems, there's no difference in that, in the sense that there are different parts of the quote artificial brain that are doing different things and then coming up with an outcome that is the most important thing. And so, yeah, I've been saying this is going to happen, and so have several other people. But I'm just glad that it's getting a little bit more attention now.
I'm hearing more and more AI systems in that way. I'm still hearing a lot of solutions. I think your point is totally correct. And it's about thinking about that human machine integrated system that has to work together to serve the customer, serve the product at the end of the day too. I'll throw another term out there. Embodied AI is another one that folks are using, just related to autonomous robots and humanoid robots, especially coming out of countries like China that are driven by AI. So we have hybrid AI, now we have embodied AI, which are the robotic side of AI, right? And giving them these physical forms to help serve customers at the end of the day, whether it's in the form of drone deliveries or logistics and packaging and things like that too. Cool.
Yeah, I'm pretty stoked about the robotic side as well. I know that's been getting more and more attention lately. I heard embodied AI being thrown around more and more towards the end of 2024, and it's getting a lot of attention now, which I think is amazing.
That is the news. We are going to have Scott from Andelyn join in just a few minutes.
All right, so we're welcoming one of our best friends from AI and friends of the pod.
She'll cut that out and post edit.
I'm keeping it in, Scott. Scott Brown, who is amazing, and I've known for a little while now. We get to geek out over all fun things AI all the time. And he's at Andelyn Biosciences, which is a partner of ours. And so I'll let him talk about the background of Andelyn, but they're in the gene therapy space. They do a lot of incredible work. They have a lot of really interesting, complex data that they work with, a lot of really smart scientists that are working with that. And I think just the overall mission of the company is really fascinating too. So Scott, why don't you give us a quick background of Andelyn in general, and then a little bit about yourself?
Okay. Yeah. Thanks, Reagan. Happy to be here. Always love talking to you guys. So was really excited when you reached out. Okay. So Andelyn is a spinoff of Nationwide Children's Hospital in Columbus, Ohio, for those people that might not be around the Columbus area. We are a spinoff of what they call the Center for Gene Therapy. Andelyn is a CDMO, so Contract Development Manufacturing Organization. What that means is we don't develop our own gene therapies. We help other companies who want to or are developing gene therapies take those from research all the way through to commercialization or anywhere in between. The reason is, why Andelyn? 2 of the 8 gene therapies that are currently FDA approved in the US came out of what is now Andelyn. So we feel like we are uniquely positioned to help clients take therapies from concept to commercial, to make impacts in primarily what we deal in is rare diseases. So stuff that you really can't address with just a drug or something. You actually have to go in and help the body understand how to do what it needs to do. My role at Andelyn is the architect for the connected plant. So what that means is I am responsible for connecting all of the equipment and instruments throughout the organization, whether that's in the lab or on the plant floor, in order to get the data. Because as Reagan has drilled into my head for a couple of years now, is AI really is data. So, it all depends on the data. So we're trying to collect all of the data we can possibly get our hands on. And we kind of took the approach out of the gate that let's collect it all. We'll figure out what to do with it later. So I kind of call myself the data supply chain. So that's me.
Yeah, and then I love the name too, Andelyn. Do you want to give just a brief background on why it's called Andelyn?
So Andelyn is what do they call it? An anagram of Andrew and Evelyn. Andrew was treated at Nationwide Children's for Duchenne muscular dystrophy when he was very young. I forget. It was like 15 years ago. And the Evelyn is, and I don't know her last name, and I apologize for that, but Evelyn's story, which is one that particularly resonates with me for whatever reason, it just really kind of gets me every time I talk about it, is her treatment was for spinal muscular atrophy, which is frequently fatal and usually by the age of 2, as I understand it. And science folks, feel free to correct me. But at any rate, she was treated for SMA. Her older sister, I believe it was, died from the disease at a young age. So when Evelyn was born, they had her tested. And sure enough, she had the same gene issue for which a therapy was developed. She was treated, and happy to report that as of today, during her yearly checkups, she is still a happy, healthy, I think 7-8-year-old girl at this point. So kind of it's, as I say, it's pretty easy to get up and go to work in the morning when you're having that kind of impact.
See, this is the kind of stuff I love, because when people have asked me, like, why do you get into AI, or why did you get into AI? I think for me, it's really understanding the impact and the use cases and where AI can have a fundamental impact within the world that we live in. And this particular area, this domain of gene therapies, is so incredibly fascinating. And I think what all the listeners will hear about, and maybe you're in different industries like finance or insurance or even healthcare on the healthcare provider side, there's a lot to learn from the processes that you all do at Andelyn. But it's also important for us to get outside of this like data and AI ecosystem and remember what we're trying to do with this whole thing to begin with.
Yeah.
So I want to talk about maybe some of the use cases that you are seeing at Andelyn. And it could be on the fun kind of research or manufacturing side, or it could be on the operational side. I think both are important and useful. But yeah, any top use cases come to mind for you?
So there's two that we're currently getting ready to deploy. One of them, I think we're going to actually do a limited rollout next week. And this first one is not kind of a sexy, gene therapy kind of story. It's more of a business thing. We request for response or request for proposals. So our RFPs, as you might imagine, in our field can be pretty lengthy because the client coming to us has a lot of questions around process and expertise and facilities and equipment and standard operating procedures, all kinds of things. And those can get pretty substantial. And historically, those have taken literally days for a business development person to put together. And it not only consumes their time, but they also have to schedule time with our internal SMEs to get those answers out for the RFP. So what we've done is kind of come up with a use case where they can feed an RFP into an LLM, which then can go against a number of documents that contain all of the information that normally goes into creating that RFP. Long story short, although I guess it's already long, but long story short, we've gone from about a 4-day time to turn around to like 4 minutes. So pretty huge business ROI for our business development folks to generate a request for proposal from a client. Then all they have to do is just review the answers and make sure they're, that they are in line with what we want to present to the client. And so they can just tweak now instead of having to go through the heavy lifting of creating it from scratch. They have all the answers and they can just literally copy paste that into the document that they want to create.
See, I love use cases like this. And I know you said it's not quote sexy, but I think the boring ones are actually the best ones to tackle, especially in the early stages where, there's a lot less risk. There's a lot more opportunity for oversight and correction. And it allows for more time for the people to focus on the things that matter, that are more complex, that are more challenging. And so I think it makes complete sense to focus on kind of the lower risk, maybe lower variability, and lower complexity use cases like this one, where you can get something out pretty quickly and also build the muscle, and culturally get people exposed to the power of the technology and what it can do for them. So have you seen any of those components play out in this process as well?
Yeah, so a couple things. Well, one of the big things that I wanted to pay attention to is I wanted the BD folks, when they get that response, to immediately be able to provide feedback back for each answer. So what we built into the responses, what they do is they upload a document or a spreadsheet, something like that, and the system will then return to them something similar, usually a spreadsheet with, hey, here's the question, it came from this tab or this page, and here's the answer. And then next to that is a column for feedback, so that they can provide immediate feedback to the system on each answer if they want to. Because I really wanted to start benchmarking how good is it? Are there certain types of questions that it's maybe not answering as well? Is there some additional training or something that we need to do? Basically a way to kind of keep iterating in flight towards getting to a better product.
You mentioned there was another use case as well that you wanted to talk about. What is the second use case that you all are working on?
That one's more science focused, and I don't think that this one will probably see broad deployment just because of the nature of it. And what it is ever since I started at Andelyn, I've had this concept in my head that I call just ask a question. My vision was to have a scientist be able to sit down at the computer and just ask a question of the data. Didn't matter what the data was. It didn't, just kind of around the science side of things. So we've kind of got the first iteration of that getting ready to deploy. And it's specifically around a particular data set, what we call titer, which is basically a measurement of the viral genomes per unit volume, which is very important from a therapeutic perspective, because depending on what you're trying to treat, you need a certain number of viral genomes per unit volume in order to have a therapeutic effect on the patient. So we measure titer across a number of different points in the process, and towards the end, or at the end when we're trying to get harvest tighter. Anyway, the point is we have a lot of data around that. So I created a kind of a separate data set of that, and then we created a system that basically lets the scientists just ask a question. They can go in and say, okay, what was the average titer for AAV9 over the last 2 years? And it'll come back with an answer. Or they can say, okay, for this lot, what was the harvest titer? And it'll come back with the answer. Now, the key is those are very scientific answers, and I don't want kind of the general user to have access to that because they wouldn't know if that answer is correct or not. So we're limiting the rollout to just the folks that literally would look at that and go, that doesn't sound right. And then they can either decide, do I need to ask the question differently, or did they just flat out give me a wrong answer? So that's kind of our second use case. Eventually, I want to expand that and add on additional data sets, but for now, we're going to keep it limited.
I think it's fascinating because it's helping with data discoverability, which organizations still really, really struggle with, of like feeling like the data is over here and we have to set so many layers to be able to actually ask questions against it. And so feeding that to direct to the scientists there, I think is fascinating. And the fact that you are thinking about how to scope it to the right users because you recognize the importance of human in the loop and being able to do that quality check on the outputs of that before any decisions are made too.
I had good teachers.
I don't know who you're talking about, Scott.
Yeah.
Well, Nick, of course.
That's great. Yeah, a lot of companies are referring to that as chat with your data, or just as a question, right? There's this massive need for getting data to the right people and having that context layer between the question and natural language and the query that happens against the data set and getting back the right answers. I think even a next step or a step further is having the lineage, the tracking, the visibility to provide sources of information to those individuals in addition to just the response, allowing them to be able to dig in and verify that is correct if they wanted to, or get additional information, which could be really fascinating. And so I guess to the extent that you're comfortable, what sort of technology or tools or frameworks or platforms are you leveraging for either of those use cases?
So for those deployments, we partnered with a company called abacus.ai. And they basically just kind of provide the platform. And then you can, to whatever extent you want to, either just go build in their platform, or you can have them, kind of help you build out if you don't have the bandwidth or the resources. In both cases, I had them kind of do most of the heavy lifting, just because, as you guys know, we're a pretty small team, so we got a lot of irons in the fire. So we leverage our vendors where we can. And those are pretty quick and easy builds, because if you think about the data LLM, it's really just a query tool. The data set exists, so instead of the scientists having to write the query or me have to write the query for them, the LLM does the query writing. So it's really just sort of a glorified code writing. But it's still pretty cool to be able to say, hey, show me a scatter plot, and it pops up a scatter plot. So it's a cool tool. And that's how we use it. And then we just let that go against our Snowflake data warehouse. I did create a specific data set for the titer. As far as for the RFP response, that's going against a folder and box that we designated for that specific tool that contains all of the documents. And that's where we keep all the up-to-date documents for the sources of information that the RFPs will come from.
Yeah, and we've talked ad nauseum outside of this podcast about data quality and assuring that, a lot of the data that the systems are trained on are correct and curated and quality checked and, version controlled and things like that. We don't have to dive too much into that today, but I guess speaking on the topic of data, I do know that the connected instruments are really important. You mentioned you're capturing as much data as you possibly can. Do you mind diving into that and kind of your TetraScience ecosystem and what that evolution, again, to the extent you can, has looked like?
Yeah, so a lot of the instruments put off a lot of raw data. That data in its raw state may or may not be very useful from a scientific perspective. A lot of times there's additional operations that need to have, or calculations or analysis that needs to occur. So there's a lot of work still being done around building that out. To some extent, our LIMS system comes into play there, where we've got the data coming from the instrument into Tetra Science, which is a cloud platform. Then Tetra is now the data source for LIMS. So normally LIMS is its own SDMS, or Scientific Data Management System. And in this case, we've kind of strong-armed our LIMS provider into saying, no, we're not using your SDMS, we're going to use Tetra Science. The reason why is Tetra really helped us kind of fix do the acquisition side of it a lot easier. Instead of having to build custom pipelines to grab the files from the instruments, parse them, and put them into a database, they kind of did all that work for us. They did a survey of all the instruments we had and said, okay, we've already got, protocols built for these 50, and we've got like, let's say 10 that we still need to get protocols for. But it kind of helped us get that heavy lift done of getting things connected and getting the data in. And then additionally, what they do is they harmonize that data into a common structure. So whether I'm using a Bio-Rad qPCR or a Thermo Fisher qPCR, the data structure is the same. So it kind of makes it vendor agnostic, because a lot of times those instruments output their data slightly differently. They call things different things. And this gives us a harmonization platform. And then additionally, on ingestion and even in the platform, I can set up protocols, rules, pipelines, tests, task scripts, et cetera, that can decorate that data with tags, metadata tags and labels, or MTL as they call it, that give us additional context. So I can decorate that data with, okay, this came from this piece of equipment or was run by this scientist or whatever. I can extract all that data and use that to decorate that data to make it more findable, searchable.
Yeah, I'm sure zero other manufacturers relate to the ability to normalize data across different sources or vendors.
Yeah.
It's
and
tough.
We have a lot of variability in vendors. So
yeah, and it's higher dimensional data too, right? Like, we're talking about lots of different data points being captured about the manufacturing process. And so being able to not just harmonize all of that, but normalize it in a way that's actionable. Do any use cases come to mind for you on some of that data that you're collecting off of the instruments?
So there's one use case in particular that I'm kind of pretty excited about, that we're pretty early in the development stage of. And what it is it's a yield prediction algorithm. Our scientists had already come up with their own algorithm in a spreadsheet a few years ago. And when I saw that, I went, okay, that's a perfect machine learning application. You've already got the algorithm. So all we have to do is figure out how to implement that. And then we have to go through the part of the data catalog. Okay, what data do we need to pull in? Where's it coming from? What format does it need to be in? What do we need to do, et cetera? So we're pretty early in kind of building that one out, but I'm pretty excited about it because it will have a substantial impact in our preclinical manufacturing, because they use that in process to decide what their next step is. Whether do we need to concentrate more? Do we need to dilute more? Are we headed for the correct yield when we get to the therapeutic yield we want at the end of this? So that's one that I think will have a lot of impact.
Critical decision points that are happening. Just earlier on the episode, Scott, we were talking about just like the importance of laying out the workflow. And it sounds like for you, laying out the workflow of the scientists and the decision points that they're making, that the algorithm in the past has helped support, and how this ML model may help support in the future. And then the offshoots of that, measuring the risk of the potential wrong decisions that they could make from that insight, and making sure they're trained up to see.
Yeah. And kind of tying it into our conversation from this morning around the platform for you guys, your platform is in that data catalog thing. As I started thinking through what we needed to be able to do that, what we're doing is using chromatography data to predict titer at the end, because we have a lot of old historical data that we can correlate. Okay, they chose this part of the curve and this area under the curve, and then we saw this yield at the end. So now we can go back and say, hey, let's plug this in and see what kind of regression model we can put together. The point being, as I went through that and seeing what data was required to help that use case, we have another use case that we're looking at, which is really just an analytics use case. All we need to do is just trend a viral control that we use in one of our PCR assays. But the same data is needed. I need that ddPCR data in order to feed, because that's measuring titer. So I need that to feed back into the engine. So the point is, there becomes a lot of synergy as you go through and build this use case, you end up kind of shoring up something for this use case over here. So it's kind of seeing how that interaction and how getting a handle around your data really helps kind of set the stage for future development.
Yeah, and we talked in the first half of this podcast too. It was just me and Nick, a little bit about connecting some of these like machine learning or more quote traditional AI use cases with unstructured information and generative, and being able to combine that context of maybe potential research or reports that the scientists have produced in natural language before, and some of the results that you're getting now, or conclusions or insights that have been written about with the actual data that you're collecting from the manufacturing process. Have you thought through how to combine these two kind of superpowers of the context and generative with the insights derived from the data?
I've thought of it. I haven't come up with anything yet. It is something that is, because I'm really fascinated, like a lot of people, I'm sure, about kind of the agentic idea, the concept of it. And I'm very interested to figure out how can I chain together different things to create create more of an actual entity, if you will, that can accomplish some task for the business that right now requires us to go hire an additional person. And as a small company, especially one who could very likely be affected by some of the NIH funding cuts, depending on what our customers do, being able to expand the bandwidth of the people that we have already is a huge value for the organization. Instead of having to go hire additional headcount, can we just give somebody at least 0.5x, if not 2x, I should say 1x to 2x, the bandwidth that they have today, so we don't have to make that next hire for a little. We can put that off a little longer because we've expanded their capabilities.
This is the other drum I've been beating for the last year and a half, is that everyone was so scared of all these job cuts, of the CFO coming in, and maybe this is a little bit more applicable to like the really large enterprises, but coming in and saying, where can we reduce headcount? What can we automate? Who can we get rid of? Right? That was the general fear. I see way less of that than I do what you're describing, which is how can we automate, yes, but grow without having to grow headcount? How can we maintain or grow on the revenue side or on throughput without having to increase the size of the company? I just think this is obviously very applicable on the startup side. It's a trend that we've seen a ton. People trying to create the $1 billion company with one person because they use AI, right? I think it's a really fascinating concept. And I think that is the general trend that I'm seeing. It's just, we're going to see less job openings happen in the market as this matures.
Yeah.
I know we're just coming up on time. So just two final questions for you, Scott, especially for our listeners. I know a lot of other folks who may be in a similar role as yours. Like, what gets you most excited about the possibilities of Gen AI and agentic in your role for Connected Plant, and just thinking about the 5-10-year goals for Andelyn?
Two kind of things pop into my head immediately. One is the maturation of my just ask a question concept, to where we can literally just ask a question of just about anything that we have data on. That's one. The second one is what I was just talking about, where how do I put together a composite agent, or let's call it a virtual employee, that can take on some work, that we can take some of that. The thing I always say when I talk about automation, because you guys know I come from an engineering background where I was literally an automation engineer, where how do you automate this machine? Is, the scientists spend a lot of time doing pipetting. And when they're doing a PCR, that's 96 wells in that plate. Yeah. It's a lot of pipe. They're literally pipetting for a couple hours. Let's automate that. The same idea, though, on other areas of the workflow. Where can we use something like an agentic AI to automate some of those workflows and get the low hanging fruit off of their plate and let them focus on what they like doing, which is analyzing data, thinking about how we improve processes, et cetera. Like move them up the Maslow's hierarchy of needs in terms of what they're doing on a day-to-day
Yeah,
basis.
we talk about that as like leveling up the work, allowing you to work on more interesting stuff instead of 96 pipettes that you have to.
Exactly.
Yeah, totally. And are there resources, books, podcasts, just things that you found particularly helpful as other folks are trying to learn about this space and trying to grasp it and think about the applications in their organization?
I'm going to put in another shameless plug for you guys, but Align AI does have some really good training programs of which I have participated. You can get those covered by Tech. What's it called? Tech
Cred. If you're in Ohio, folks,
Tech
yes,
Cred.
Cred's a great
If
program.
you're in Ohio.
Yeah.
And then I listen to Reagan a lot. We've had a lot of coffee together and had a lot of conversations, and Nick too. And as far as reading, I probably devour just about everything I can find. Articles on Medium, Substack, whatever, people talking about AI. There's a few people that I've started kind of following that seem to have been around AI for a while as well, and just listening to them talk about it, because I'm always interested in what's their view on what AI is doing right now, because everybody's excited about it. I think that people are a little more excited than what necessarily the possibilities are right now, but things are still advancing very quickly. So what we're able to do today is not what we're going to be able to do 6 months from now. So, so I just, like I said, just everything I can possibly get my hands on to try and learn as much as I can about the landscape.
I find myself so conflicted because sometimes I'm like, oh, this is so overhyped. Like some people really do spin that marketing machine like hard, and of course, companies like Accenture and kind of the big firms, they, not to name names, but they spend a lot of time overhyping impact because they want to have that perceived value because they want to sell their services to other people, and I get that. I understand that. We're a vendor in this space too, so I'm not saying that that's wrong necessarily, but it happens every time. So much so it has a name, hype cycle, right? And then I get conflicted because I see some of the magical things that AI can do, and I'm like, oh my God, that is really cool. Like, you get wowed, and then the wow factor kind of goes away. The novelty goes away really quickly. And again, demos are great. The demos are cool. The demos are really cool. But then when you get into practice, reality starts hitting you in the face pretty hard.
Yeah. I mean, demos are always happy path, right? So they're perfectly set up and curated use cases. So the thing that I found very helpful is for us is focusing on very specific use cases. Rather than trying to blast AI out to the entire user population. Okay, what can we do that has some impact, that gets our feet wet, lets us get some reps under our belt, and then expand from there, kind of crawl, walk, run.
Scott, I wish we had more time. Thank you so much for hopping on. This was our episode 23, so our Michael Jordan episode. So you are
lucky number, strangely enough.
Really? Well, there we go. Perfect timing. We will also put Scott's LinkedIn profile in the description, folks, if you want to reach out to him as well. Scott, thank you so much for your time today. It was a pleasure to have you. We hope to have you again on soon. And for listeners out there, thanks for listening to AI or Die.
Thanks. I really appreciate it. Have a good one.